I'm so glad to welcome our wonderful sister who is coming to offer the activist breakdown. Well, we love this dear sister. Many of you have seen her, whether it's on stage or whether it's on film. She is an actor and an activist. It is none other than Piper Perabo. She is the honorary convening co-chair for convening for achieving our country, and she is a member of the William Monroe Trotter Collaborative Advisory Board. Piper, it is such a delight to see you this morning.
Thank you. It is so exciting to be here. Thank you for those remarks, Mr. Crawford. I'm always so inspired when I hear you speak, and thank you so much for starting us off that way. It was beautiful. Hello, everyone. I'm Piper Perabo. I'm an actor and activist, and I'm honored to be here today because mostly I'm fans of so many of the speakers at this convening, like Latasha Brown and W. Kamau Bell and Nseu Fought, Ali Young, Sarah Seidner, Letitia James, and so many more. So make sure you check your schedule and don't miss these talks. For this many leaders to gather and teach is really the chance of a lifetime, and you don't even have to leave your house. So I'm going to speak very briefly today about healthcare inequities exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, in particular for workers who are not covered by the labor laws in this country, namely domestic and farm workers. First, a quick history. When Congress first passed federal labor protections in the 1930s as part of the New Deal, they excluded two groups of workers: domestic workers and farm workers. Domestic and farm workers were left out as a concession to Southern lawmakers whose states were highly invested in paying low wages to personal servants. The Fair Labor Standards Act excluded both groups from the right to earn the minimum wage or get overtime pay. At the time, that workforce was overwhelmingly Black and Latinx. Today, about a quarter of the farm workers and 67% of housekeepers earn less than minimum wage. Both groups were also excluded from the National Labor Relations Act of 1935, which gives workers the right to form labor unions and organize for better working conditions. And then when Congress passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, domestic workers were left out because the law didn't include protections for workers whose employers have fewer than 15 people. That means it's technically legal for employers to sexually harass nannies and housekeepers or to discriminate against them based on race, religion, gender, or national origin. In 1970, when lawmakers passed the Occupational Health and Safety Act, a landmark labor law which established a worker's right to safe and healthy work environment, once again, domestic workers and farm workers were left out. Now, flash forward to the COVID crisis. Remember at the beginning of the pandemic when we all cheered brave first responders who confronted COVID-19 risk every day and thanked grocery workers and tip delivery people extra? The childcare providers who made it possible for these essential workers to keep all these things running, and the farm workers who got food to the groceries when the shelves went bare, these essential workers went largely unnoticed, and their health and safety at work is not protected by law. COVID-19 put domestic workers and farm workers under unprecedented strain and exposed deep fissures that have been ignored for decades. Over the past year, these workers have been enduring a range of hardships, from lack of safety equipment to limited access to COVID testing and paid sick leave when they got sick or had to quarantine from exposure to COVID. Due to their immigration status, many didn't qualify for the benefits from the COVID-19 relief bills. Some of these farm workers were guest workers, subject to the whim of their employers to make changes to keep them safe during their housing and transportation and workplaces. For example, 200 Mexican agricultural guest workers at a single farm in Tennessee and 169 farm workers at the Green Empire Farms in New York were infected with COVID. It appears that their employers failed to keep them safe. According to testimony this spring before the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, there has been an estimated 560,000 positive COVID-19 cases and more than 9,100 deaths among agricultural workers in the U.S. as of April 2021. There was a 59% increase in mortality among Latino food and agricultural workers alone in the state of California from March through October 2020. Due to COVID-19, we were all advised by health experts to stay home and avoid indoor contact with individuals who are outside our own household. For domestic workers who work in other people's home, this means either losing work completely, in most cases without an alternative source of income, or facing a risk of COVID-19 infection. We may never have the full picture of the crisis, but it demonstrates an urgent necessity to bring economic security and safety to all work. That means providing access to pandemic relief to these essential workers and winning policies that ensure that domestic workers and farm workers are covered by labor laws. In 2019, I lobbied Congress with domestic workers and the National Domestic Workers Alliance for a Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. Hundreds of workers traveled to campaign on Capitol Hill to talk to lawmakers. And even though I know the facts, it was still shocking to sit in a senator's office while working women explained that they aren't entitled to overtime pay or a minimum wage. They can be terminated suddenly for no reason, and they get no specific sick days or personal days. They can't get workers' compensation if they're injured on the job or unemployment benefits if they're fired. So of course they aren't given paid leave or healthcare benefits. I remember in particular sitting with Connecticut Congressman DeLauro, who said that the reason she's able to work in Congress is because she has domestic care to help take care of her mother. Congress can't run without domestic workers. And neither can so many other jobs who needed child support when the schools closed because of COVID. Here's the hopeful news. 9 states have passed laws extending labor protections to domestic workers. Oregon, California, Connecticut, Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, Hawaii, Nevada, and the city of Seattle. Instead of doing this state by state, we can pass the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, introduced to Congress in 2019 by then Senator Harris and Congresswoman Jayapal, which will demonstrate that domestic work is not only work, but that it's critical to our economy and society. Also introduced is the Fairness for Farm Workers Act, which would give agricultural workers the same minimum wage and overtime protections as the rest of the US workforce. That bill has 54 co-sponsors in the House, but has not made it to a vote. The COVID crisis has further illuminated that domestic workers and farm workers need economic security and safety at work. Before I conclude, I want to credit 2 women who are leaders in this work and express my gratitude for all I have learned from them. Monica Ramirez, who is the founder and president of Justice for Migrant Women, and Ai-jen Poo, the director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. As we think about healthcare disparities exacerbated by COVID-19, I would urge everyone listening to keep domestic workers and farm workers in the front of your mind as we move towards health equity. The Federal Domestic Workers Bill of Rights will be reintroduced in June by Congresswoman Jayapal and Senator Gillibrand. And I encourage you to make sure your members of Congress support it. You can call them and tell them to support it. You can call them right now. The Congressional Switchboard phone number is 212-224-3121. We all deserve to be safe at work during a global pandemic or any other day. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for letting me speak with you all today.